That form was new in 2017, and this bill does some cleanups and makes some changes to it, most of which are not substantive. So that's in subdivision 5. And then subdivision 6 is just a mechanism that gives some additional protection for lenders who have a security interest in the manufactured home when it's still personal property. That language is in the current law, and it's left unchanged by this bill other than changing the subdivision numbers. So that's kind of an outline of what the bill does in the text. That's a conclusion of my testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair and the members. Again, happy to answer any questions you have about the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. We do have a question from Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this goes to Mr. Spellman or Mr. Nielsen, but I actually was a previous real estate appraiser. I did appraisals from about 1992 until 2000 and I believe 5. And sometimes in the lending institution on the appraisal report, they'd ask for this number. Did anybody contact the lenders, someone from the Lenders Association, to make sure that this is works with what they're doing? As well, I know a lot of times there was issues with this certificate on the tag and they had to be put in an appraisal. They needed that number. Just can you tell me how that works out and what you've talked with the lending institution and how that works with this new restriction?
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Jasinski. It actually came to my attention that my camera was off during my testimony. I apologize for that. But actually, John is the expert here. I'm gonna defer to him.
Mr. Nielsen.
Sure. We've had, as Matt and Senator Ruud have noted, Mr. Spellman and Senator Ruud, involvement from the mortgage lenders. So we don't really have much in the way of concerns there. The affidavit of affixation that gets recorded at the end of this process and put in the real estate records will include the serial number. The certificate of title would have the serial number, but also when you write into DVS and say, hey, cancel the records on your end for this home because I'm going to turn it into real estate because it's permanently affixed to the land. And you also have to include the serial number there. So you'll still need to know the serial number. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that exact concern raised in the question, but again, the lenders have been involved. I'm not sure how this would change that particular issue with an appraisal.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you. I just want to make sure they were consulted and okay. And the last time I've done an appraisal was several years, and those forms change relatively frequently. So I didn't know if that applied now as it did then. But I know back then there was always a space on the appraisal report, and if you didn't have that, it always seemed to raise a red flag, and there was always issues with that. So I just want to make sure that we're not causing any undue harm or unforeseen circumstance where this would cause a red flag in the financing of a property. Thank you.
Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Nielsen, I guess, first thing I want to say is the only thing I wish is I was the co-author on the bill. I think it's something that drastically needed to be done. But I do have a constituent that turned in when they first affixed their manufactured home to the property, they sent in their title. And now they wanted to refinance, of course, with the low rates. And the lending institution wanted their title. And of course, the state doesn't have it any longer. And it held up. In fact, I don't believe they ever got an opportunity to refinance their property. So I'm assuming, can you give me any assurances that this fixes that problem?
Mr. Nielsen.
It certainly should help. There's two steps here. You previously needed your original title and you had to send that into DVS, and then they send you something back saying, yeah, we've canceled that title. And then your next step is to go record something in the actual county land records. So there have been lots of challenges on this topic. This bill, you would still have to record something in the county land records. Sometimes a consumer will complete that first part where they cancel the title, and then they never record anything in the county land records. I certainly don't think this is going to hurt that here. If you've lost your title or you sent it to DVS and it got lost along the way, this would help that consumer because all you have to do is send a letter to DVS and say, hey, I'm the owner, make sure I'm the owner in your records. Here's the serial number, cancel my title. You don't have to go find another one or get a duplicate. So I think it partially addresses that problem, but you still got to record something in the land records. Sometimes that never gets done. So I think this makes in some ways the process easier, but you'll still have to do that step. I certainly don't think it's going to make it any worse. And we did, to Senator Ruud's point, we did, as part of the 2017 legislation, there's a different statute that we're not changing today that also helps with some of these issues. So occasionally that will get used to apply and make some of these problems easier.
That take care of your question, Senator Howe. I do not see any further hands up. Senator Ruud, any further or final comments on your bill?
Mr. Chair, just thank you for allowing us this hearing today, and I would appreciate members' support.
Thank you, Senator Ruud. This bill is to be re-referred to the Housing Committee. Senator Kiffmeyer, would you make that motion, please? You are muted, Senator Kiffmeyer.
It was a wonderful speech, Mr. Chair. I move Senate File 675 as amended be recommended to pass and referred to the general orders, Mr. Chair.
The Housing Committee.
The Housing Committee.
All those in favor of Senator Kiffmeyer's motion, please unmute and say aye and give me a thumbs up, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no, and a thumbs down. The motion passes and the bill is on its way to the Housing Committee.
Thank
Senator
you.
Ruud, congratulations and thank you for coming in to see us.
Thank you.
Our next bill up is Senator Johnson's bill, Senate File 948. Senator Johnson, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to start today, I'd like to ask a quick short answer test here question. So what does the Bugatti Chiron, the Porsche Taycan Turbo, and the Tesla Model S have in common, besides being ridiculously expensive? They all have enough, I see a lot of head shaking, so I'll just answer it. They all have enough power to get from 0 to 62 miles an hour in 2.4 seconds. Now, the neat thing about that is the Tesla Model S is an electric vehicle. And we all see the electric vehicle coming in a pretty big wave and gaining popularity across the state. It's something that my son Archer is extremely excited about. Unfortunately, we are still back in the, I guess, early 21st century with our Ford Explorer, but it's something that's coming. This does draw to what Senate File 948 is about. If we want the image of the electric vehicle to continue to grow and be favorable, we want to make sure that it's treated on an even playing field. Unfortunately, within the Minnesota State complex, we have charging stations right now that people are able to access without contributing to the expense that the state and thus the taxpayers are paying for those required chargers. So what Senate File 948 does is it just simply puts a fee, service fee, on the electricity that's used to those people who use those particular charging stations. We talked with administration about doing more of a you plug in and you're charged for the electricity that you're using. However, that would require some new hardware to be installed and some software to actually meter that out, which could be very expensive. So what they said is, well, we can figure out how much electricity is used on the circuit, and we can just put that on as a fee, a service fee that folks can pay then for their parking spot. So a pretty fair look at that. We'd also put on there depreciation of those charging stations and the small administrative cost required to administer this program. So that's the simple gist of the bill. Any questions, I'm happy to take.
I do not see any testifiers that are indicated to come in and testify. One question, Senator Johnson, do you have an idea as to how many charging stations currently exist on the Capitol complex?
Mr. Chair, I do not. Administration does have, I know we've got several in our basement of the Senate office building, but there are a number sprinkled throughout the complex. And I don't have on hand that exact number. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Senator Johnson, I just had staff hand me a note. There are currently 69 EV parking stalls and 4 EV metered parking stalls in the Capitol complex. Certainly more electrical charging stations than I thought. The only ones I'm aware of are the 2 down in the basement of the Senate office building. Any members have any questions on this particular bill? And so that you know, members, this bill will be laid over for possible inclusion. Any questions? Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair and Senator, how many of those stalls, what was it, 62? How many of those stalls are in pay positions? For instance, in the pay lots and the pay ramps, where a person could go in there and potentially pay extra just by putting more quarters in or something else that could charge them for it.
Senator Carlson, are you asking for, in effect, public parking where a charging station would be available?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. On the campus, in the our parking facilities.
I'm getting a note here that there might be 16. I don't know if that's definitely accurate or not. Senator Johnson, do you know off the top of your head?
No, I'm sorry. Without administration, they were pretty good to have those numbers last time, but they just chose not to testify today. So
yeah, and I'm sorry, Senator Carlson, I don't have the answer to that either. I believe there are a number that are available to the public, but I just don't know for sure.
Mr. Chair and Senator Johnson.
Senator Carlson.
The rest of them are free. Is that correct? And the rest of them are free for charging.
Well, they're all free at this point, I believe.
But they're not free to park, but they are free to charge.
Yes. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Senator Jasinski just answered my question. I was wondering if we were going to hear from administration if we had some benefit of insight into their perspective on the matter. I'm given to understand that we find some aspects of the bill a little bit difficult to administer, the depreciation charges, for example, tracking depreciation and factoring that into the charge that people pay for using the charging infrastructure. But do we know, Mr. Chair, if admin is here and they can provide us any perspective on this question or this bill?
I do not know. Are there any members from the Department of Administration dialed in on our Zoom? And Senator Dibble, I am not seeing any. Senator Johnson, do you have any information on Senator Dibble's question?
I do. Mr. Chair and Senator Dibble, they were the one that came up with the electric service fee initially, which we agreed on and they were very supportive of. They were not as supportive of the depreciation or the administrative costs. They did not make the argument, however, that that was difficult to track or that could not be come up, or they couldn't come up with that. However, they wanted it was more of a policy aspect from them. They wanted to encourage the use of electronic vehicles. So they want to use state taxpayer dollars in a way that encouraged the growth of the electronic vehicle growth. So we differed a little bit on that aspect, but on the general service fee, we were in full agreement.
And Senator Dibble, given this bill is laid over, we could ask Senator Johnson to reach out to the department and see if he could get some answers to your questions in the interim. Senator Dibble.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this bill is, I kind of tilt for it and I kind of tilt against it for the reasons that Mr. Johnson just articulated. I'm solidly on both sides of this bill, so it's hard to argue for paying for people's private power, transportation energy at taxpayer expense. On the other hand, it's good to encourage the use of electric vehicles because of the larger environmental benefits that they represent. So I'm glad we're not taking a vote today.
We are not. And Senator Dibble, I agree with you that the electric vehicles are going to be, ultimately, they're going to be very good for our environment. But I also believe, and I suspect you do too, that those who are utilizing the electricity from the grid should pay for it. Maybe we aren't quite at a point where it's real easy to determine that, but I do think that folks ought to be paying for the electricity that they're pulling. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, yes, I think there are a lot of things to consider here, but I think it's important for us to remember that the grid doesn't just magically have electricity appear. It's going to be nuclear power, wind power, solar power, and in many cases also even coal power, not so much in the US anymore, but certainly around the world. And I just think that the recognition that there are precious minerals that are in these charging entities, same thing with windmill blades and solar panels as well. So I don't think you can, I think when you plug in, it looks like, well, that's just a really neat kind of thing, but that energy comes from somewhere, it has to be generated. And I think you take a more complex, broader look at the whole thing. And I think the recognition that we've heard before here comes as well, to pay your fair share. And so I think for us, in regards to these electric vehicle charging stations, I think time has come. If these vehicles are proving themselves, then I don't think that at this point anymore, it's necessary to give them free energy.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to follow up, thank you, Senator Johnson, for bringing this bill forward. I agree with your bill. Have you worked with the administration to get any idea of what a possible, is it a monthly fee would be, or any type of their flat fee? I mean, is it 25? Is it 10? Is it, I mean, do they have given any indication of what that number may be?
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Jasinski. So we talked a little bit about that in the prior committee, and one of the things that we discovered was an average charge for a Tesla S is right around that $16 to $18 per charge. And then if you get down into the smaller vehicles like the Leafs and things like that, you're looking more around that $8 to $10 per charge. So it'll take some time to really figure out what the usage is. And I imagine they've got that data right now. So that's, I don't think these will be significant burdens on the individual drivers because you come to work here and you probably won't have to charge up your full charge, or maybe you won't have to charge up every day. So they shouldn't be burdensome charges, but that'll give you an idea of about what the monthly cost would be on that.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then just to follow up on that, the logistics of it, are the stalls, I understand there's 61, but I think it sounds like there's 16 of them that are basically designated to those people who have electric vehicles. So if I'm Senator Jasinski and I come in and I have an electric vehicle, I park in my assigned stall and I would pay that fee versus I'd say a rotating stall or something where someone can charge or available for the public. How would that work? Did you discuss that with them at all?
Sure.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Jasinski. We didn't talk about the logistics on the monthly or if we've had designated stall. However, in the Senate office building, as you know, we have the opportunity to have a designated stall, and we pay a monthly fee on that particular stall. So within the Senate office building, that's how I imagine this would function. And I imagine most of these would function the same way, unless they were a public access charging utility. Then I imagine you wouldn't be able to park in that for a month. You'd have to kind of rotate first come, first serve basis.
Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Johnson, when you mentioned bringing your Tesla in and getting a $17 or $18 charge, if I live in Maplewood and I'm only using maybe $1's worth, do I still have to pay the same rate as someone that's coming in from 200 miles away and does a full charge every day? Is that something that we can differentiate between those users? I mean, I really like this idea, but I really have a problem with not using a metered source. There are meters, but like you say, they're kind of expensive. But I would suspect that it might be days, weeks, or months when metered charging stations are going to be really popular, especially the private ones. So I would like to see that kind of thing really pushed to get the metered ones in there, so that when I drive in with my Leaf, that I don't have to pay a Tesla rate. So thank you for bringing this up, and I really want to figure this out. And I'm definitely with Senator Dibble being on both sides of this issue.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I too, just doing simple math here, I'm wondering how we're going to meter this. So just a few things to think about. Reflecting on what Senator Carlson said, and also informed by my experience at the University of Minnesota, where we also have charging stations in all the parking garages. Number one, the problem with you is that people park there and then they take up the plug for the whole day. So that makes me think that we have to have somehow a management system wherein if we have more than 3 potential users in the Senate, they have to share, and we can't have one guy hogging that. Senator Dibble, when he affords his new EV SUV, he can't be hogging that thing every single day. And so, I mean, I think that's a real problem. It's definitely a problem at the university. And so then we have to have some kind of calendar or rotation, and now we need another person to manage that. And do we charge every day, or does somebody assume that you only need to charge once a week? And so I think the math gets pretty hard on this. And by the time you're done figuring it out, somebody has already, we've had to hire a full-time employee. I just want to offer up something else. This is an infrastructure question, and it makes me reflect on my experience traveling around the world. I have traveled to many, many countries, and we have an expectation, kind of, I mean, this is a core value in the US, that we provide things free that we highly value. I mean, when's the last time you paid to use a toilet in the United States? Now, if you travel around the world, when you go to South America, you pay every time you use a toilet. There is, in fact, a cost to treating sewage. And I'm happy to tell you guys about that. As you know, I'm kind of passionate about those things. But my point is, if we support behavior, like we don't want people to use the streets for toilets, like many people do in South America, then we create infrastructure that supports that. So anywhere in America, pretty much, if I have to go to the bathroom, I can find a free place to go. I know it's kind of a silly comparison, but in fact, it's true. And where I'm going is, if we want to support the use of electric vehicles, let's make it as easy as possible for people who want to do that. Just like we make it easy for people to use clean public restrooms instead of pee in the streets, frankly. So thank you.
Senator Johnson, I do not see any other hands up. Any final words on your bill?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members, for the opportunity to present the bill today. I just want to get back to the bill itself, and you know, this was an idea that the administration had as well on paying for for the electricity going through. So it's not that it came necessarily just from me, but it was something that I think a lot of people feel like we need to start looking into this a little bit, and I think this makes it a much more fair process here. So. Appreciate the time today, and thank you so much for hearing it.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. With that, Senate File 948 is laid over for possible inclusion. Next bill on our agenda is Senate File 1326, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senate File 1326 is a bill dealing with the compensation for members of the Minnesota State Patrol. And if members remember, in the 5th special session, we actually included a provision to increase their pay by 8.4%. And what we realized is that we actually had a pay study done by the OLA that shows that their pay is dependent upon, if you look start with the state patrol's pay and go to the highest paid law enforcement agencies, or if you take the highest paid law enforcement agencies and go to the top pay for state troopers, the difference is somewhere between at one way you'd figure it's at 16% below, or other law enforcement agencies are over 19% higher than the state trooper pay. So what we were trying to do is bring that up a little bit. And basically what this bill does is continue that 8.4% pay into the next biennium. The other thing it does do is it does affect the use of pattern settlement by making that actually not the primary purpose. It actually constitutes bad faith in the negotiations. But with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer the A1 amendment.
And Senator Howe, is the A1 an author's amendment?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair.
Senator Howe offers the A1 amendment as an author's amendment. If you would please unmute, turn your cameras on. All those in favor of Senator Howe's motion to adopt the A1, please say aye and give me a thumbs up, please.
Aye.
Those opposed, no, and a thumbs down. The motion carries. The A1 is adopted. Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is mainly a technical amendment, but the other thing that the A1 does is it actually adds the state troopers, supervisory and managerial positions in with the 8.4% along with the troopers. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to my testifiers.
Thank you, Senator Howe. We have Mike Ledoux with the State Patrol with us. I'm looking around for Mr. Ledoux. Here he comes. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name, with whom you are associated, and proceed with your testimony, please.
Mr. Chair and committee members, my name is Mike Ledoux. I am the president of the Minnesota State Patrol Troopers Association. I have had the privilege of being a state trooper for the last 27 years, and I am currently a station sergeant assigned to the Duluth station. I want to start by thanking Senator Howe for his advocacy and his tireless efforts to improve the wage disparity issue for the 500 plus men and women of the State Patrol. I would also like to thank past and present members of the Transportation Committee for their bipartisan support, as well as Senate Majority Leader Gazelka for his support. I appreciate the clear and concise and objective report recently released by the Legislative Auditor's Office. As you know, Chair Newman, I was not surprised by the findings because the Troopers Association had previously gathered similar wage data. The OLA report indicates troopers were 5% below the median starting wage and 16% lower at top wage. I would draw attention to page 7 on the OLA report, and I would quote, "The top base wage that could be earned by state troopers in 2019 was substantially less than top base wage available to police officers in most cities reviewed." I think it's important to recognize that this disparity is large and based on 2019 wage data. The legislative intervention taken during the special session helped mitigate the disparity at starting wage, but a large disparity still exists at top wage. This disparity hurts career earnings, retirement benefits, and creates retention issues. Prior to the passage of the legislative market adjustment, we had lost troopers at unprecedented levels to non-retirement separation over the past 3 years, costing taxpayers over $1 million in training costs alone. I am happy to report that recruitment and retention have already showed signs of improvement. I have had several troopers tell me that if not for this legislative action, they would have pursued other employment opportunities. This wage disparity was created as the result of the practice of pattern settlement and 5 years without contractual increases from approximately 2003 through 2012, which exacerbated the disparity. SFL 1326 strengthens that salary survey language that was passed in 299 D03 during the regular session last spring. This legislative oversight is needed to assure that this wage disparity is eliminated so we can continue to recruit, retain, and ultimately retire these dedicated public safety professionals. It will allow us to continue to recruit the best of the best instead of the best of the worst. It also provides much needed funding to support the market adjustment moving forward so the State Patrol can continue to provide the level of security, safety, and service to Minnesotans that they expect. Mr. Chair, I would be happy to answer any follow-up questions anyone may have and appreciate the time this afternoon.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Boyd, beginning on line 1.12 of the A1 amendment, there's a list of appropriations that are blank. I understand the fiscal note has been ordered but is not yet back. Do you have any information as to what the appropriations would amount to? I'm particularly interested in the appropriation from the Trunk Highway Fund.
Mr. Chair, I actually don't have any idea for you. We will be getting a fiscal note on the amended version of this bill, and it can hopefully fill in those blanks as soon as possible. But because that's on a smaller, these blanks are for the supervisory and managerial positions, which is a smaller complement than the overall salary. So it's hard to give an estimate for those right now. I'd have to depend on the department for that.
On the line 1.3 of the A1 amendment, there is an appropriation there. Is that for all of the troopers?
Mr. Chair,
minus the supervisors?
Mr. Chair, yes, that's for, there's a continuation in the underlying bill of the 8.4% for the state troopers and not for the supervisory positions. And this is just a correction. An amount for commercial vehicle enforcement was accidentally left out of that number. So this appropriation here is just correcting an appropriation for the state troopers that got the increase last year.
And I would think, Ms. Boyd, that given the fact that there is some general fund money, this will go to the Finance Committee. Am I correct?
Mr. Chair, any money would bring it to the Finance Committee, but you're right, especially that. And that would be for the capital security, just to be clear.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Boyd. I do not see any hands up and I do not have any other testifiers. Senator McEwen.
Mr. Chair, I just had a question about first page line 9 through first page line 15. It's the it has to do with the collective bargaining aspect of this, and I just wonder if the union representing state troopers is behind this and wants to see this, or where that provision is coming from. I wonder if we could just get a little more specifics on that. Thanks.
Senator Howe.
Well, I think you just heard from the president of the State Troopers Association, which is their bargaining element. So if Mr. Ledoux wants to just, they're well aware of this. This is this has been something that we have talked to MMB about for the last 3 years. So they've seen it.
Mr. Ledoux, can you lend any light on Senator McEwen's question?
Mr. Chair, Senator McEwen, the State Troopers Association is 100% supportive of this legislative initiative. I know last year you weren't a member of the Transportation Committee. This process started in 2018. It started because for over a decade, we were unsuccessful in making meaningful movement to closing this wage disparity. And we were starting to suffer losses of experienced troopers at unprecedented levels. I did considerable research on other state patrol agencies and highway patrol agencies throughout the United States to look at what they had done to address similar issues with recruitment and retention, California, Colorado, Washington, et cetera, which is how this particular piece of legislation came to be a combination of best practices from those respective groups. And I would also like to say, while we may all be in different boats, the other members or other state law enforcement officers, we've all been in the same storm in that we've been held hostage essentially by the practice of pattern settlement. For lack of a better term, we have collective begging because we're essential employees and lack the ability to strike. Mr. Chair.
Senator McEwen?
Thank you very much. That answers my question. I just wanted some more information. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. I do not see any other hands up. Senator Howe, any final comments? Oh, Senator Dibble.
Mr. Chair, some of the confusion is, I think, when we talk about pattern settlements, who are we patterning those contract settlements on? And I actually asked this question in environment because we had the similar bill that sweeps in the other law enforcement state personnel, the conservation officers and the like, into this same regimen that we're seeing here today for troopers, because they were left out, and so they want to be included. And when we say pattern, we mean patterning on other state employees, not patterning on other law enforcement agencies, other jurisdictions. And so that's how troopers got out of step with what other police are being paid, particularly around the metro, certainly around the state. If I'm not correct, Mr. Ledoux can correct me.
No, that's
Mr.
correct.
Ledoux?
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, you are correct, sir. The majority of the cities in the study encompass the 7-county metro area, cities with populations over 25,000. However, it was also, we also included cities of the first class, which includes Duluth, Rochester, Minneapolis, and St. Paul. I believe that covers them all, sir. Mr. Chair.
Senator Dibble?
Thank you. So while I'm sympathetic, and Mr. Ledoux knows that I've been a supporter and I've signed on to some of these efforts in the past, we should just be aware, have our eyes wide open here that we are stepping outside of the collective bargaining process. The collective bargaining process has put us in this position, and I'll put some of this at the feet of the various administrations in which we had asked for some sort of salary adjustment so that the state troopers weren't getting so out of step with what police in other agencies were being paid, but that didn't happen. The other state employee unions are going to be taking a look at us and wondering what the heck. So we just need to be aware of that when we take these steps.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Senator Howe, final words on your bill, and then you could make the motion to move it. It goes from here to state government. Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members. I will say that I did my best to negotiate this a way to keep from having to come back. It is what it is. We have to do something to keep from spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to train new members to the Troopers Association when we shouldn't have to. We should be able to, our goal should be to recruit, retain, and retire our troopers as some of the outstanding law enforcement agencies of our state. And I hope that as we go forward, we'll take care of all of our state law enforcement as they should be. And with that, Mr. Chair, I move that Senate File 1326 as amended be passed and referred to the State Government Committee.
Members, if you would please unmute, turn your cameras on. All those in favor of Senator Howe's motion, please signify by saying aye and give me a thumbs up, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no, and a thumbs down, please. The motion carries, and Senate File 1326 as amended is re-referred to the State Government Committee. Next, we have Senator Coleman's file, Senate 1446. Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very excited to have this bill heard today. To provide a little bit of background, basically the Social Security Agency has been working across the country to allow the public to apply online for replacement Social Security cards rather than having to do it in person or over the or through the mail. The problem is that our statute doesn't allow that to happen, so people are being forced to mail in their information, including their driver's license, and having to either choose to not drive or drive illegally while they're waiting for their replacement card to get to them and for their license to get mailed back. This bill solves that issue so that we can follow the feds and allow online applications for replacement Social Security cards. Specifically, it allows for DPS to distribute the driver's license information to perform identity verification for the replacement cards. Representatives Emmer, Fischbach, Stauber, and Hagedorn have all requested this change, and so far DVS has no opposition to this bill. With that, I don't think we have any testifiers on it, but I'm happy to take any questions.
I do not have any testifiers listed, Senator Coleman, so we can go to member questions at this point if there are any. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Senator Coleman, you mentioned that DVS is opposed to this bill. Could you just give me an idea? Did they explain to why they would be opposed?
Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Kiffmeyer. I apologize if I misspoke or if I cut out. They have no opposition so far.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked the question, Mr. Chair. I misunderstood. Okay. Yeah, it didn't quite come through. Well, that's good to hear. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it is definitely a good bill. I have constituents who have run into this issue and who will be very, very happy to have this matter resolved. Thank you, Senator Coleman, for bringing it forward.
I see no other hands up on this bill. Senator Coleman, any final comments? And then you could make your motion. This bill is to be re-referred to the Civil Law Committee. Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for giving this bill a hearing. I'm sure we've all heard from constituents who have faced this issue, and I support any measures to make government easier and more efficient for the people it serves. So with that being said, I move that Senate File 1446 pass and be re-referred to the Civil Law Committee.
Thank you, Senator Coleman. Members, if you would unmute and turn your cameras on, please. All those in favor of Senator Coleman's motion, please signify by saying aye and give me a thumbs up, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no, and a thumbs down. The motion passes. Senate File 1446 is re-referred to the Civil Law Committee. At this point, members, I have two bills up, so I will pass the gavel to Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Chair Newman. The next item then on the agenda is Senate File 1151, Senator Newman, to your bill.
Mr. Chair, members, in recent years, I have been noticing more and more bike lanes being moved over onto vehicle lanes. This is true, I think, of city streets, county highways, and trunk highways. The best example I can give you for a trunk highway right here in St. Paul would be Snelling Avenue, which is a trunk highway, and it has now received a bike lane on it. I believe that bicycling is it's a legitimate and important activity, both from a recreational standpoint and as part of our transportation system. However, folks who buy and use bicycles do not contribute to the Trunk Highway Fund or to HUTDF. The sources of that money, of course, is the gas tax, motor vehicle sales tax, and license tabs on motor vehicles. So the reason that I have brought this bill forward is to have it determined and placed in law that MnDOT cannot use vehicle lanes that have been created and paid for with trunk highway funds or HUTDF funds and make bike lanes out of them. I have no doubt that this would be somewhat controversial, but I do think that the bicycling community has to recognize that vehicle lanes are very expensive to produce, and they are not contributing to the production or the maintenance of them. And that is the reason for the bill. There's certainly nothing to say that MnDOT cannot create bicycle lanes. I think it's clearly within their authority. I think it's within the federal legislation that has come to Minnesota regarding bicycling and pedestrian lanes and so forth. But there should be I believe, a prohibition on using trunk highway funds to create bicycle lanes. That is, in a nutshell, Mr. Chairman, the bill.
Thank you, Senator Newman. So with that, before we go to members, we believe we have two testifiers. I was informed by staff that Mr. Griley may not be here, but I believe he is, but we can go to Mr. Ruud first while we confirm that. Mr. Ruud, could you please state your name and affiliation and proceed with your testimony?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Eric Ruud with MnDOT Government Affairs. Thanks for the opportunity to provide a few comments. Just would like to, remind folks that MnDOT is a multimodal transportation agency, and one of the department's goals is to promote bicycling. Bike trips are an efficient, non-polluting, healthy form of transportation. And I'd just like to point out a few places where the department is actually required to incorporate bicycle facilities on transportation projects. So starting on the federal side, we're required to make reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Title II of the Civil Rights Act requires the department to meet general accessibility requirements, including, of course, on the trunk highway system. Federal law requires us to give due consideration under federal law to bicycle needs. Federal law, and I'm going to quote here, says that bicycle facilities shall be considered in conjunction with all new construction and reconstruction of transportation facilities, except bicycle and pedestrian use are not permitted. And so that's just a highlight. There are actually several places in federal law where we're required to incorporate bicycle facilities, and those requirements would not go away even if this bill was enacted. And so the effect of that then would be that we would need to use federal funds to construct bicycle facilities on any federal aid highway projects. On the state side, I'd just like to point out that Minnesota Statute 17401 that creates the Department of Transportation has in its very first sentence facilities for walking and bicycling as core components of our transportation system. The legislature has directed us to implement a complete streets policy in Minnesota Statute 174.75 to operate and maintain the roads for the benefit of bicyclists and other forms of transportation. The legislature has also created the Active Transportation Program, the Safe Routes to School program, other programs that really have directed MnDOT to incorporate bicycle accommodations within our transportation system. So certainly trunk highways have a role in helping people bicycle along and across our transportation system. We've heard from Minnesotans that they have a desire for bicycle facilities that are safe for all types of people, regardless of age and ability. This is reflected in our statewide bicycle system plan. And we have some bicycle routes that are located on trunk highways. Others are located on local roads or on shared use paths, but might have a connection that incorporates a piece of trunk highways. So, just a couple final comments. It's difficult to break out the cost of a.
Mr. Shetland, can you mute, please? Thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr. Ruud.
That's all right. Just about finished, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to point out that it can be extremely difficult to break out the cost of a bicycle facility as part of a transportation project. If we're just doing a stripe as part of a paving project, that cost is really very minimal and is not separated out. It's just a matter of where the lines are painted, for example, at the end of a paving project. So it would be very challenging for us to track, how the cost of creating a bike lane, for example, as part of a paving project, how would we even track that, and how would we try to ensure that we weren't spending trunk highway dollars on that? And finally, just point out that we know that bicycling does support a lot of economic activity in the state. In 2016, we did a study of the economic impact of bicycling and found that bicycle-related events and activities contribute over $14 million annually to economic activity. And in fact, we've seen, both walking and bicycling increase since the pandemic started. It's a healthy way for people to get outdoors and do a safe activity. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to make those comments.
Thank you, Mr. Rudin. And then I was just informed by staff that Mr. Griley did have to leave. However, members, you should have all gotten an email just recently at about 3:56 that has a letter stating his testimony in writing. So seeing no other testifiers, Senator Newman, any further comments on your bill before I go to member questions?
Yeah, I just want to comment on what Mr. Rudin had testified to, and I will tell you that for the most part, I don't disagree with anything that he said. I do believe that bicycling is an important economic activity. I think it's good for people. I think it's part of our transportation system. However, having said that, the issue that I'm bringing to the committee is not whether or not we should have bicycle lanes, but that we should not be paying for it out of trunk highway funds, which is supported exclusively by user fees of people who drive. And the entire purpose of having those vehicle lanes paid with user fees is for motor vehicles. I think the underlying problem really comes down to the fact that MnDOT is starved for general fund money. And when I say that, just keep this in mind. Of the total general fund budget, general fund money, MnDOT receives 1.7% of 0.5%. of the general fund. And you will see over and over again that I think that's a major part of the problem that MnDOT has, that they are going to say, we don't have the money to prepare or build or make these bike paths. So they use trunk highway funds to do it instead. And that's what I'm questioning. What we really should be concentrating on is getting some money into MnDOT out of the general fund so that they can operate their state agency. And so just think about that. 1.7% of 0.5% is all the money they get out of the general fund. And they are expected to operate an agency with no general funds money to speak of. And you've got this great big pot of money sitting there called the Trunk Highway Fund. It's irresistible. So again, in my mind, it comes down to not being in opposition to the bicycling world or bicycling as an activity or a transportation mode. It comes down to the funding source. And I believe it is improper to take money for bicycle paths out of the Trunk Highway Fund. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Newman. With that, we will go to member questions. The first one I have is Senator Dibble and then Senator Johnson Stewart. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Newman, for your perspective. Probably won't be surprised that I have a different perspective, but you and I do agree. I mean, we've had a number of conversations both in your office and in this committee about generously guarding the Highway Tax Distribution Fund and particularly the Trunk Highway Fund, which is a subset of the HUTDF. And so, you know, I've been supportive of measures, some of which I think are going to come up in a later bill of yours, to make sure that we're using those dollars appropriately and we're keeping agencies from reaching in where there is no nexus with the proper and safe functioning of the larger transportation mission of the Department of Transportation. I view this subject with a somewhat different perspective, though, in that I think Mr. Ruud spoke to and what Mr. Grilly would have said, which I think he probably captures in his letter, which I haven't had a chance to review, and that is that the Department of Transportation is tasked with, you know, creating public highways. It's tasked with ensuring access to destinations, you know, greater opportunities, protecting the environment, you know, making sure that transportation functions well for everyone in a safe manner and in a way that causes the least amount of harm and you know, has some, you know, has the least amount of unintended collateral consequences. It doesn't say that that anywhere that they're mandated to collect user fees and create, you know, the very expensive concrete and asphalt highways only for those who pay those fees. It says that they, you know, their task, their constitutional and statutory duty is to provide for, you know, public highways, mobility, access, et cetera, and making sure that walkers, bicyclists, people crossing streets, et cetera, even though in that moment of that activity, maybe not generating motor vehicle sales tax or license tab fees or gas tax, are contributing, first of all, have the right to expect to use those facilities for transportation purposes safely, the vast majority out of which is, you know, paid for with those dedicated funds. And we can have this, you know, debate about propriety of the general fund or not, which I totally respect, and people fall down in, you know, different perspectives on that subject. But they do have the right to use the facilities in that manner. And in 99.999% of the time, they are paying to contribute to both the trunk highway system, which is about what, 10% or, you know, 15% of the total mileage in the state. But they're also paying for the rest of the transportation network if they're paying sales tax, if they're paying property tax and other forms of taxes as well. And every trip is started and finished on those local roads. And so the trunk highway system cannot exist in a vacuum. It exists in tandem and in network and in conjunction with the entire transportation network, whether people are driving or walking or biking or using transit and the like. And so I think to pass this bill would actually violate what we're directing the Department of Transportation to do. And I'll just draw another parallel or metaphor. We pay all kinds of taxes to do all kinds of things that we'll never see the direct benefit for ourselves. But we pay those taxes because we know it has a more general benefit overall to the state because it benefits other people, maybe other people in different stages of life or who live in a different part of the state. We've had this conversation about how much Minneapolis and Hennepin County generate well in excess of any of the taxes that come back to Minneapolis or Hennepin County. Even through our gas tax, motor vehicle sales tax, and license tab fees, we subsidize to a great degree the county state aid highway, the municipal state aid street system. And I'll probably never be up in the northwestern corner of the state driving on those roads. Maybe I will, hopefully I will someday, but I'm happy that my taxes are making those highways safe and smooth and wide and passable, et cetera, because it has an overall benefit. So that's my perspective, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Next on the list, Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Senator Jasinski. A couple weeks ago, I said I was the only senator who had done a pavement design. I would also venture I'm the only senator who has worked with the local community to create what we call a typical section through a roadway that has a trunk highway serving as its main street. So I have done that many times. It's part of a process that MnDOT calls preliminary layout and project scoping. Just think right now of every rural community that has a trunk highway serving as its main street. I mean, I just was writing down a few: Lake City, Red Wing, Lindstrom, Alexandria. I mean, the list goes on. And it's only when a city has safety concerns and builds a bypass like we saw in Pequot Lakes or others that we move that trunk highway off the main street. But a critical part of the alternative layout is meeting with the local communities to find out how they want to use their main street. And I have been in this business 35 years. In those 35 years, things have changed. We used to have big, wide swaths of trunk highway going through our city streets. Think of Lake City, it's a good example, where we would have room for 5-6 lanes times 12, because of traditional pavement width is 12 feet. So that's 72 feet from curb to curb. We don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore. And so to pass this bill would imply great difficulty in figuring out how local governments can get what they want, but not have MnDOT's trunk highway fund pay for it. So for example, if Alexandria wants to redo their main street, which is a trunk highway, and they say, well, we don't want 72 feet from curb to curb. We want bike lanes. We want mixed use. We want to put the road on what engineers call a road diet because it slows down traffic. This is the common practice right now. And more often than not, I would venture every time this is what local communities want. So now if we pass this bill, that puts the MnDOT engineers in a position to have to break out the cost of anything that is not highway related. So if they have a bike path or if they have some other, bike path is the only thing that, or bike lane is the only thing that we mention here. But if we don't do that, the bikes, well, it's just problematic. If we do it, somebody has to figure out how to prorate that cost to the cities. Cities don't have any money anyway. If we don't do it, the bikers are going to use the sidewalk or they'll use the highway lane, which is a challenge for safety. So I don't see how this is easy on an engineer. I have done many, many cost estimates. We do break it out by agency, but if we start telling the cities that they're going to have to pay for their own bike lanes, that puts them in a really hard spot. I'm so glad every time I hear somebody saying MnDOT is desperate or starved for general fund money, because it allows me to remind us that we have dedicated funding for transportation in Minnesota. And if we increase the gas tax, which has not been done in over 10 years, we currently are 29th in the nation for gas tax, we would have plenty of money to do this. And so to say that we need to find ways for MnDOT to get more money by doing all the things we've been seeing us do in the last few weeks is disingenuous. We know how we can give our local, county, and state governments more money for roadway infrastructure, and we're just choosing not to do it. So I'm voting no on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Johnson Stewart. Anybody else? Seeing none, back to Senator Newman before we will possibly lay this over for possible inclusion. Senator Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I would simply mention that, we often get into the definition of the highway purpose language in our Constitution, and there are differing opinions. In my opinion, the motor vehicle sales tax and the motor vehicle tab fees are there for a highway purpose, and that involves automobiles. And that is the money that should be used to be making these lanes. Now, there's nothing wrong or illegal with bicycles occupying a vehicle lane. They've done it for, since we began building motor vehicle lanes, I suppose. But automobiles can't go onto a bike lane. And so the net effect of it is that you're chewing up vehicle lanes by making dedicated bicycle lanes and paying for it with trunk highway funds. And I disagree with that concept. The truth of it is that there is a limited number of trunk highway miles in the state of Minnesota, and you could easily consider putting the dedicated bike lanes other than on trunk highways. That would be the complete bill, Mr. Chairman, and I would simply request that you lay it over for possible inclusion.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Senate File 1151 is laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you, committee members. Next one this evening, or this afternoon, I should say, Senate File 1364. Senator Newman, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is kind of an interesting bill in that it is dealing with a committee within MnDOT called the Transportation Program Investment Committee. It is a committee that has existed for a very long time, and it was or has been created wholly within MnDOT and MnDOT's jurisdiction. The legislature, to the best of my knowledge, has never been involved with it at all. And in point of fact, MnDOT does have a charter on this particular committee. It's called TPIC, TPIC. And this longstanding committee created by MnDOT is made for the purpose of helping make capital investment decisions and recommendations to the commissioner. It has authority that it is effectively, I suppose, given itself, that both TPIC and the commissioner have the authority to override the standard programming processes. The committee consists of voting and non-voting membership. And so the operating procedures of this committee are really quite well established. We've got voting members that are the various assistant commissioners within MnDOT and the chief financial officer. And then we have non-voting members who are essentially division directors within MnDOT. The committee operates on a monthly basis of having meetings. There are quorum requirements, voting requirements. There are proxy voting that are permitted, and it has various tools that it uses to work within MnDOT itself. The biggest problem that I see with the committee as it has been set up is there is no public input at all that I can see. There's no legislative input in this that I can see, and there's no transparency that I can see. It is a committee at the top echelons of MnDOT that makes some pretty important decisions regarding how money is going to be spent and what programs it's going to be spent on. So I thought it might be a good idea, rather than just allowing this TPIC committee to remain wholly under the control of MnDOT, that maybe we ought to just create it in statute rather than by MnDOT rule. And consequently, I had drafted Senate File 1364, which for the most part takes the MnDOT charter on TPIC, and I put it into a bill so that we have some statutory or legislative control over this committee. Tried to build in some transparency and tried to build in some public input by allowing legislators to sit on the committee and participate. I do have, Mr. Chairman, an amendment. It's be an author's amendment, the A2, which I would offer at this time.
Senator Newman offers an author's amendment, the A2 amendment. All those in favor say aye and raise your thumb. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. The A2 amendment has been adopted. Senator Newman, to your bill. Or to the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Jasinski, that really is the gist of the bill. I'm asking that the committee take a look at it. I just simply believe that we ought not to have a committee with the type of authority that this committee has without transparency, public input, and legislative oversight. And when I look at this charter, I simply didn't see any of those things. And consequently, I've decided, let's draft a bill and have the committee weigh in on it and see what you think of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Newman. We have one testifier, Mr. Rudeen. Could you please state your name and affiliation for the record? And please continue with your testimony.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Eric Rudeen with MnDOT Government Affairs. And thank you, Senator Newman, for that explanation. You know, it's helpful to kind of hear your thinking on what you're trying to accomplish here, but I do want to provide a little context, if I may. First, I'd like to point out that this group and the senator referred to it as TPIC, so that's how I'll refer to it as well. This committee really does not select individual projects. It sets that sort of high-level investment direction and provides programming guidance to the districts. Most project selection occurs at the district level through the area transportation partnerships, which are open public meetings. I know that legislators sometimes attend those meetings in their local communities. Most of our projects are really driven by needs identified through our pavement and bridge models, because most of our projects are really about pavement and bridge preservation. TPIC's role in project selection is really focused more on unique funding opportunities. For example, if there is a federal grant program, and this group might provide input about which projects the department should apply for those, special one-time funding opportunities. TPIC is a part of the decision-making process. It includes a lot of discussion. It includes dissenting opinions. And, it's really not clear to us whether that sort of unfettered discussion would take place if there were members of the legislative branch in attendance at those discussions. This is really an internal advisory working group, and we're just not sure if it's really, the best idea to sort of have legislators attend and be part of those discussions, especially considering the staff level of people who are on this group. The commissioner is not a member of TPIC. The deputy commissioners are not members of TPIC. So, is it really appropriate to sort of have legislative versus a little bit lower staff level people that would be sort of interacting in this capacity? One sort of unintended consequence of this might be that it could really push programming investment decisions sort of further into the recesses potentially, because, again, people just may not feel comfortable having those sort of open discussions if legislators are part of the group. I would point out too that establishing the committee in statute would create a challenge, anytime there was a department reorganization. For example, if we had a new commissioner who changed some roles within the agency, then we would have to return to the legislature to make any modifications to the membership structure of the committee, which would be challenged. I think would be challenging. And finally, it's certainly appropriate and welcome that we have legislative input on project selection. For example, the legislature directed us to do the project selection policy, which we've implemented. We do an annual major projects report that is provided to the legislature. I mentioned the area transportation partnership process. We have state plans, two of which are just starting the process to be updated now, that has public input. Other states have a transportation commission. In Minnesota for a while, we had a major projects commission that consisted of legislators and the commissioner to sort of review the department's program and investment decisions. That might be another model that potentially could be more appropriate. So I wanted to just sort of put that forward as something to think about as you consider this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Radin. So that's the end of our testifiers. No member questions that I see yet. Senator Newman, any comments before we go to Senator Dibble? Who just raised his hand? Sorry. Senator Dibble.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Senator Newman, for this bill. Just a couple of quick thoughts and maybe a couple of questions. One is, Senator Newman, how do you envision this proposal intersecting with the project selection reforms that we have enacted in recent years, some of which I think you've actually endorsed by extending those project selection reforms to a number of other areas of responsibility for the Department of Transportation?
Senator Newman.
I would see this as an extension of the transparency that we've tried to create within the selection process. The lack of transparency within MnDOT at this committee level is part of what I find bothersome. Mr. Radin has indicated, well, maybe staff wouldn't be comfortable discussing matters regarding MnDOT with legislators present, and I'm wondering why not. I don't, legislators appropriate the money. We are trying desperately to become involved in and have some say in the selection process. Why would MnDOT employees be uncomfortable if there were some legislators listening to what was going on, if we in fact believe that we should have transparency within MnDOT? One of the things that when I read the charter, it says that TPEC has got the authority to override the standard programming processes. If we have standard programming processes in place, why does this particular committee, with no public input and no transparency that I can see, have the authority to override that standard process? So candidly, Senator Dibble, I think taking a real look at this particular committee goes hand in hand with what we're trying to do with the selection process. And I'm not saying that this bill is exactly right. It's sort of the first crack at it in terms of TPIC. I'm not so sure I even understand in totality what TPIC is all about. But and perhaps I'm becoming paranoid, but when I don't see any transparency, I don't see any public input, and I hear that maybe they wouldn't be comfortable if we were sitting there listening to what they were talking about, that does raise red flags for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And since nobody's hands, I'm just going to echo that. I've been involved with the Quarters of Commerce, and since I've been in the legislature, I've done some of the selection process changes that we've seen. And I think we've gotten great feedback from that. It opens a transparent process. Communities like mine that didn't know why Highway 14 kept getting turned down were frustrated. And I could put that to Highway 212 or Highway 23 or Highway 8. And once there was that transparency process and we could see the results of those studies or those selection processes, people were much more felt like they were understanding of why that was being done. And then also I've been in the legislature for going on my 5th year, and I know it always gets down towards the end, and negotiations start to keep going on. And I won't say it's which party, but it's usually a minority party in either the House or the Senate expresses their frustration how decisions were being made in the middle of the night in a closed meeting room and not having that. And that again brings up the discussions that Mr. Ruud just made, not being comfortable that if we were there involved. So it brings up those same issues. And again, I believe in the transparency issue, having some involvement makes some sense. I do agree with Senator Newman that it may not be perfect yet, but it's a first crack at it, I guess is the best term, that may raise the awareness on some of the frustrations that we as legislators have of not being involved with the processes and the selections and things going on. So thank you, Senator Newman, for that. And with another hand up being Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't quite done yet. I just wanted to ask Senator Newman. I see that legislators are named to the committee as voting members, and maybe Ms. Stengel can help us. I'm not familiar with instances where legislators actually have a vote on these kinds of committees that are that have to do with the executive branch committee decisions. I mean, certainly legislators are voting members of the Outdoor Heritage Commission, on which I serve, the LCCMR, and we make some exception for the IRRB. Took some significant legislative consideration. Maybe Senator Newman to have legislators. Let me just say for the record, I'm for transparency, sunshine, collaboration, disclosure, all of that, particularly if we determine that this TPIC committee has significant power and influence. I don't know that we know that they do, but if they do, those meetings should be publicly noticed. Their minutes should be available, the criteria that they use to consider their decision-making should be publicized both ahead of time and during their meetings and afterwards, et cetera. And even maybe having a seat for legislators there as ex officio members. I can understand the argument that one, that might be a bit of a reach for the legislative branch to be sitting and participating in it's kind of like we're creating super legislators out of those legislators who are lucky enough to actually make a vote on those kinds of decisions. And two, it might inhibit some of the debate, particularly if those legislators have a vote. I'm ex officio on a couple of different advisory committees to MnDOT. I don't have a vote. I don't think people feel shy around me. They say what they want, but I don't have a vote, which is, I think, kind of proper there. But Ms. Stengel, do you have? So I have two parts. One is I just want to know, Ms. Stengel, do you have examples where legislators sit on committees like this and have a vote, or is it more common to have legislators sit on committees like this in an ex officio capacity?
Ms. Stengel, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Senator Dibble, I don't know if this is common. It may be, it may not be. I believe the bill is going to go to state gov, and they may have a better perspective on whether this is common or unusual.
And then, Senator Dibble, do you have a second question with that?
I'm wondering if Senator Newman might think I have a point there, that maybe legislators, even if they are sitting there, may better be suited in an ex officio capacity.
Senator Newman.
Well, the reason why the legislators are in a voting capacity in the bill, as written, is because TPIC makes recommendations to the commissioner on items that they are discussing. And Senator Dibble, as you well know, I am trying somehow to find a way in to influence the project selection process. And thought, well, if the legislators are in a position to vote for something where they are, and the vote is by, as I understand it, by a majority vote of TPIC, to make a recommendation to the commissioner, the legislators would have some influence on the outcome of the vote. As to whether it would be better to be an ex officio member, I don't know, maybe state gov will take a look at that. I don't know.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Senator Dibble, follow up.
Just to prove that I know I have a similar interest, I am now I'm chief author of a bill and am requesting that Senator Benson hear it, that has to do with the Medicaid Drug Formulary Committee, which really makes very profound decisions that affect people's lives. They can decide whether to exclude particular pharmaceuticals from the Medicaid drug formulary. And so if a patient needs to have access to that particular drug, they would have to go through either step therapy or the prior authorization process, or just simply not have access to that pharmaceutical, even though it may be the only particular pharmaceutical that's suitable to their medical condition. And an instance arose last summer where they were making a decision to exclude 5 drugs. And the only reason anyone knew about it was because it kind of percolated up by rumor and conjecture. And sure enough, they were considering this class of drugs, but they wouldn't let anyone advise them. They wouldn't tell anyone what they were considering, why they were considering it, on what basis. And even when they had the hearing, which was a public hearing, tried to keep people from testifying, didn't provide any written record of their decision, even for the commentary period, which occurred for 10 days after that public hearing. So I have a bill that completely revamps and reforms that particular committee and who sits on it and how they do their work and what they take into consideration when they're thinking about it. But even there, I would feel uncomfortable seating elected legislators on that committee, because I would think it would, the danger we would run is that those decisions tilt, because we take, politics into account, which have all kinds of cross currents that don't necessarily hew to objectivity and analysis that's not vested and invested in the outcome. So that's why I'm a little hesitant on letting legislators sit there, because I think we need to guard against politicizing the project selection list, as much as we possibly can, so that projects that are selected simply don't go to the most powerful legislator or the most favored legislator. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Senator Newman.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. You have accomplished exactly what I have asked, and that is some input into the bill. And you have made some very good points, and I really do appreciate it. I did want the committee to see this, to think about it. I don't think it's in its final form as of yet, but I will most certainly give thought, Senator Dibble, to your caution about having voting members versus non-voting members. I think that is a point well taken. I have nothing else on this bill, Mr. Chairman, and I see we are burning daylight. And I think this bill,
correct.
Where does it go?
Thank you, Senator Newman. Yes, the bill will be going to State Gov. So final comments, and you can move your bill.
I would move Senate file, to get the right one.
1364.
Well, yeah, there we go. Thank you. Senate file 1364, as amended, be recommended to pass and be re-referred to the State Government Committee.
Okay, motion is made. All those in favor signify by saying aye and giving a thumbs up.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, a nay and a thumbs down.
Nay.
No. Motion carries and the bill moves on to State Gov. With that, I will turn the gavel over back to Senator Newman. Senator Newman, you have the gavel.
Thank you, Senator Jasinski. The final bill that we have on for today is Senate File 1513. And this is a bill that, this is Senator Dibble's bill, and I'm going to acknowledge him in a moment. But Senator Dibble and I have talked today. He has his main bill. I have an A1 amendment. He has an A2 amendment. And so our game plan for today is to just present the bill to the members, let them take a look at it. Have you take a look at, I'll offer the A1 amendment, he'll offer the A2 amendment. Then we're going to withdraw our amendments and lay the bill on the table and see if we can meld the A1 and the A2 together for a bill for you to consider before we move it. So that's sort of the game plan that Senator Dibble and I have prepared for purposes of this afternoon. And so with that, I would recognize Senator Dibble regarding your bill, Senate File 1513. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the earlier conversation, the ability to take a look at your proposed changes and your willingness to take a look at my ideas and listen to my response to your proposed changes. And I'll go quickly. I know we're past time, and a few members of the public want to, as well as the agency, I think, want to weigh in on this. So I'll just try to be very, very abbreviated in my outline of the bill. Senate File 1513 would create administrative citations that could be given to those who don't pay their fare on buses and LRT and the like. It's mostly focused on, of course, transitways, light rail transit, because people are able to just simply step onto the trains, as well as arterial bus rapid transit, having already paid their fare off board. And so there's no driver, no operator to go past while you pay your fare. So it's a little easier to go on board without paying your fare, and that becomes problematic. The issue is that right now, failure to pay your fare results in a fairly significant criminal penalty that that's $100 fine with a $75 surcharge, and creates a criminal record. And for a lot of people, that's simply uncollectible, and or very, very often those penalties simply get dismissed because they clog up the court system, and a lot of prosecutors, defenders, and judges think that it's a little bit out of proportion to the level of the offense that it actually is. So the goal is to create a meaningful consequence for failure to pay a fare. And also in another part of the bill, create alternative resolutions to satisfying the sanction or the consequence, whether that's community service or prepaying fares and the like. To the bill itself, it allows the transit police or community officers or other non-sworn personnel to issue the administrative citations. It doesn't allow them to double dip, so then they can also give them a citation for the criminal offense. The fine itself would be $35. It does have permissive language to allow for an escalating fine for subsequent violations. Sets out the time frame in which people can either appeal or contest the citation or pay it. And like I said, there's an alternative resolution process that's available. So that's the broad brush stroke outlines of the bill, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. There are two testifiers that I have listed. The first is Mr. Kustra from the Metro Transit. If you would introduce yourself, please, and proceed with your testimony.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Wes Koister. I serve as the General Manager for Metro Transit. I think I'm going to get help with my slides here from I believe from the committee administrator, if I'm correct. There were some technical issues going on.
Looks like you're coming up now.
Okay. I will begin then.
And Mr. Kustra, I just remind you that, we're a half an hour past. I understand we just got started on this bill, but we are running late. If you could keep it as brief as you can and still get your point across, please.
Well, let me do this. I was prepared, Mr. Chair, I was prepared to testify on both provide a safety update and to talk a little bit about our perspective on the administrative citations bill. I can just move to the comments on the bill and save the safety update for another time, if that's your pleasure.
That would be, I would appreciate that, Mr. Kustra.
Okay, very good. Then I will not need the slides. I'll just say that increasing an official presence on the transit system and establishing a more welcoming and regulated environment remain key to the improved safety of our riders and an improved transit experience. The Administrative Citations Authority in Senate File 1513 would be a powerful tool towards this goal. Current law makes fare evasion a misdemeanor that can only be charged by a sworn officer with a current fine of approximately $180. As a misdemeanor, fare evasion citations must be administered by the courts, and our experience has been that these citations are rarely prosecuted by local governments. Senate File 1513 would allow us to have employees who are not police officers inspect fares and issue citations. The resolution of those citations would be managed internally instead of going through the court system. And we believe that the administrative citations will be an important element of our overall efforts to improve fare enforcement. And this is especially important as we continue to build light rail and bus rapid transit that rely on off-board payment. Currently, off-board payments occur for more than 1/3 of our rides, and this will grow when operations of Green Line Extension, D-Line, arterial bus rapid transit, B-Line, arterial bus rapid transit, and future transit ways begin service. But we also believe that funding administrative citations will bring a much greater official presence on our system and create a more welcoming customer experience. It will not only increase fare checks and deter fare evasion, but it will also provide more eyes and ears on our transit system that will deter crime and other problem behaviors. It will allow fare checks to be issued with a less threatening experience and provide opportunities to educate people about our fares and fare programs and to connect them with a fare structure that's best for them. And it will allow us to better focus police time on response. It's also a fair response to fare evasion. Misdemeanor enforcement of fare evasion results, as I said, in a $180 cost and a criminal record for not paying a $2 fare. We think this is incredibly harsh and think that about this. And so we ask you to think about this in comparison to a parking ticket, which is another form of penalty for not paying for the use of public transportation service. We believe this harsh penalty for such a relatively small offense contributes to the hesitancy to allocate limited prosecutor time to the adjudication of fare evasion citations. It is not that paying fares is unimportant. We believe fair and a more robust system of fare enforcement consistently and equitably applied will result in notable improvements in fare compliance. Similar changes are being made in other transit agencies across the nation. So overall, administrative citations would be one important part of our broader efforts to improve transit security, perceptions of safety, and the overall customer experience. Chair Newman and members, I again thank you for the opportunity to testify on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Kuster. I appreciate the testimony and the fact that you pared it down to the bill itself. We really do appreciate it. We also have Mr. Scherer on to testify on behalf of East Metro Strong. If you would identify yourself for the record and tell us who you are from or who you are with, and then proceed with your testimony. And I would again ask that you keep your testimony as short as possible with still getting the information across. Mr. Scherer.
Mr. Chair Newman, thank you very much for having me on today. My name is William Schroer. I'm the Executive Director of East Metro Strong. We're a public-private partnership between 2 counties, 6 cities, and several large employers in the East Metro. And I would ask the same question that the general manager did. I believe that the testimony that I want to offer is useful and answers a couple of the questions, but I want to follow the chairman's lead, and I think that I can do this in about 5 minutes, but I would ask for your direction in terms of what you'd like for me today.
That would be fine, Mr. Schroer. If you could do it in 5 minutes, that would be acceptable. Please proceed.
Very good. Thank you very much. So I want to touch on a couple of, I want to share with the committee some research that we have done, and I hope that it is useful to the committee as you consider the legislation in front of you and the challenges around it. So when this subject came up last year, and my board asked me, they were very concerned, as I think a lot of people were, about reports of crime, and not just reports, but the experience of it. And everyone on the board supports transit use by their employees, by visitors to their facilities, and wanted to respond to concerns both about safety and about fare payment, and asked what were good practices in this area. The current research at the time dated back to 2012, and it's in front of you here, and you can review it yourself. It echoes some of the approaches in the legislation in front of you, and it's also from 2012. So my board asked me then to update that research if I could. We did a variety of research. I want to let this committee know that that research has been peer reviewed and was presented to what I would consider one of the premier national transportation research conferences in the country, the Transportation Research Board annual meeting, usually held in DC, now virtual. But I want to emphasize that A, peer reviewed, and B, recent research. So since 2012, a number of other agencies around the country listed here for you have picked up on and implemented the approach that was suggested almost 10 years ago now, that off-board fare payment works for a lot of reasons. It's more efficient for everybody. It's more efficient for the agency. It's more efficient for the riders. It raises some additional concerns that Senator Dibble noted. How to respond to those? Well, these agencies in front of you have implemented fare enforcement strategies that use, to begin with, staff other than sworn police officers to do that fair enforcement. And they also treat fair non-payment as a petty misdemeanor or its equivalent, much as this bill does. I would underline that all of these agencies work closely with police. This is in no way a replacement of police or anything like that. And these agencies have found that although the new staff that are deployed to do fair enforcement and other tasks have those tasks as their first priority, a follow-on and very important benefit is that those staff also increase public safety. From those agencies, at a high-level review, we did detailed interviews with a number of chiefs of police of transit agencies and sought to learn more about their experience with deploying non-sworn staff to do fair enforcement and other kinds of rider services. And we also did some interviews with folks locally that I'll mention in a minute. The lessons that all of these folks shared with us, and I will share with you, that the degree of unanimity from these chiefs of police was pretty remarkable. As we've heard over the last couple of hours, there are a lot of different opinions that one can have in areas of transportation and public policy generally, no surprise. This is an area where there doesn't seem to be a lot of debate. The chiefs of police agree uniformly that this approach works and that they want to expand this approach in their own agencies, and, well, not telling anyone that they don't work with what to do, certainly endorse this approach in other agencies as well. So adding non-police staff lets police focus on policing, and non-sworn staff, even if their primary job is to do fair enforcement, also act as a presence and force multiplier that reduces crime through presence. And by creating, and I would say this, all the police said that this was actually quite an important part of the role, creating a positive rider environment. You probably know that Minneapolis and St. Paul also have both downtown ambassador programs where security and other agents are put on the street, hired by the downtown councils or in the Downtown Alliance in St. Paul's case. Not exactly the same situation as on Metro Transit, but we wanted to learn from them as well. And they shared very much the same lessons as the chiefs of police, that additional presence is super helpful, that there are a lot of needs that don't, A, need police, and B, might be better responded to by someone who is not a police officer, and that they work very well with the police, and that their presence is a net positive overall. So all of those lessons work together to, in my view and in my board's view, support the general direction of the legislation from Senator Dibble in front of you. This is a direction that practice is going nationally. There's not time today to review some of the recent developments in this area, but I can tell you that agencies have made permanent or expanded programs in this way that build on the successes of these kinds of approaches. And so I would urge you to do as my board has done and learn from other agencies who have taken some risks and implemented these programs and found that they work. I hope that that is helpful to the committee, and Senator Newman, to you. Thank you very much.
Senator, you are muted.
Yes, I am. Thank you. I was saying, Mr. Chair, if you would provide a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that you just gave, particularly to myself and Mr. Dibble, perhaps the entire committee. That would be very helpful. I'd appreciate it. At this point, just in the interest of time, members, I am going to offer the A1 amendment. I will explain it extremely briefly, leaving it to you to read it when you wish. And then I intend to withdraw it, and I'll recognize Senator Dibble. The A2 amendment, members, came about because I had, over the last year, modified my position when it came to the civil penalties. Last year, when this came forward, I have to admit I was rather intransigent in my belief that we had to retain the criminal penalties. I have since changed my mind on that. I have listened to PowerPoint presentations such as Mr. Scherer has just given us, and in any event, I've changed my mind. And so I decided I would take a shot at the transit safety bill, and that is the A1 amendment. And in the A1 amendment, there's just some aspects of it would be a code of conduct, an administrative citations program. It would call for, in my case, I called them uniformed transit safety officials. Those representatives from Met Council have been called transit ambassadors, transit monitors. I'm not so sure that the name is important, but in my bill or my A2, I did put them in uniform. It provides, the A1 provides for a civil process, administrative citations, and a report. And I'll allow you to, like I say, read the amendment at your leisure. But I noticed that in looking at the main bill, then my A1, then Senator Dibble's A2 amendment, maybe we could meld them somehow and come up with a bill that everyone is comfortable with. Because I think that at this point it's a distinct possibility. So that's my explanation, albeit brief, of the A1 amendment. I will at this time withdraw it and recognize Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Before I forget, I thought I would mention that Mr. Schroer's PowerPoint presentation is posted on the committee website. So it's there for folks to take a peek at. And I think there's also some written testimony from Move Minnesota and maybe others on this matter. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate taking a look at the A1. And the general gist of my reaction to it is that a number of the things that are proposed in the A1 already do occur. And so, so there's no harm in requiring those activities and actions in statute, things like the code of conduct being posted and monitoring LRT boarding facilities and some of the other requirements of the amendment. It's a bit more prescriptive, whereas my approach is a little bit more permissive around escalating fare structure and the exact construction of the administrative citations program, as well as the personnel and their duties and their staffing complement and the like. And it doesn't have the alternative resolution elements and stuff. So, it's just a little bit of a different approach. Some stuff that goes a little further than I would be comfortable with. And so that was my response and reaction to the A1. I'll offer the A2 and just call members' attention to it. What the A2 would do would be to require the Met Council. So the A2 would be complementary to either the bill or the approach that Senator Newman describes. And it would create the Transit Ambassador Program, of which there's been some discussion around this subject in relationship to both failure to pay fares on transit, as well as some of the other issues that we've talked about now for a few years that crop up on transit, making the rider experience less than ideal. And in very, very short summary, what the Transit Ambassador Program envisions would be, it doesn't say so, so we would need to improve the language a little bit, but an easily identified person or group of people through a vest or some sort of a uniform that would be in transit, on transit, that would come from various communities that would have the ability to approach individuals, who are either in crisis or otherwise engaging in behaviors that make other riders uncomfortable, with the skills of being able to connect those folks with services if they need services, de-escalate circumstances, and call in additional support and help, police if need be, and the like. It's similar in concept to, if folks are familiar with Mad Dads and what they do, and going around and intervening in crises, or just approaching people, creating goodwill, creating good positive relationships, de-escalating and the like. The Hallie Q. Brown Center has ambassadors. The downtowns, as Mr. Shore mentioned, we have ambassadors who roam the streets, helping keep things clean, helping people with directions and solve problems, and also are the eyes and the ears, and help extend the reach of other folks who help keep our transit safe and secure, and the like. And so that's what the Transit Ambassador Program would seek to accomplish. I'll just mention that it's the A2 amendment that I offered. I actually had a subsequent A3 amendment drafted that turned the may into a must. And so it would say the council must implement a Transit Ambassador Program. And that would be my intent, would be not to make it an optional for the Met Council to do, but would give them specific direction to do so. And so with that, members, I will withdraw the A2.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. And members, given the time, I'm not going to entertain any questions, but Senator Dibble and I will work on this and see if we can come back to you with a bill that is acceptable to everyone, and just wish us luck. Members, with that, we have, Senate File 1513 is laid on the table. And with that, members, our business is completed and we are adjourned. Thank you very much, members.